This is a Dubied flat knitting machine, hand operated. Uh, I have fabric hanging on the needles and I'm moving the carriage, but nothing is happening because the cams are deactivated. The cams, when they retract, cannot catch the needle. So let me activate the cams. This allows the cams to drop down to engage the needle. And I also will need a yarn. Pushing a button over here where the plunger comes down, it will capture the feeder and transport it across the needle bed. So as I'm moving it, the yarn is being fed right to the needle. So that's the job of the feeder. It feeds the yarn to the needle. The stoppers determine how far the feeder travels. So at the end we have a yarn stopper or feeder stopper, and it allows me to go further, but the feeder stops there. We don't want to drag the yarn all over the place. Right now I'm only knitting in the front, which is what's called jersey. But the exercise that we're discussing for lab number 1 is rib. So in order to get rib, I have to activate the back cams also. So now I drop down the back cams and all the needles will come up to catch the yarn. Let's see. And now we are making loops front and back. So this is called rib fabric. Now, jersey I was knitting a little loose because it has to be looser on these type of machines. But rib, a good setting is 15. So by turning the little knobs on the side, we adjust the loop length. So now I'm going to 15 all around, which will be our standard to which we compare our other swatches. This assignment is to show you how changing stitch sizes and yarn size affects the fabric. So we make 5 different fabrics this way. This will be our standard. Let's see what it feels like. The setting is 15 all around, and we go back and forth, and that would be our fabric. So we're going to start the fabric, the swatch number 1, and we need to separate between the two. So I have another feeder with a nylon separating thread that we knit in a tubular fashion. That means in one direction we knit the front only, in the other direction we knit the back only. The cams are split so you can do different things in different directions. So now as I come across, only the front needles will come up to capture the separating threads in nylon. Then when I come back, the back will come up, but the front will not. And the back is coming up, and we now have made a tubular separation. When we say tubular, that means we in sequence knit front, back, or back, front, alternatingly. If we keep knitting that way, we get a tube, which could become a sock or some other circular end product. So the separation has been performed. Front and back coming up. So we're knitting front and back. So that's knit all. So now we're going to activate the nylon separating thread. We want to knit the front going left while missing the back. And when we come back from the right, we want to knit the back and miss the front. So it's cam down, cam up, cam down, cam up. Yes. Nylon selected. So now only the front needles are coming up. Only the front is knitting. Now only the back needles come up. Only the back is knitting. And if we keep doing this, we will be making a tube. But in the case of the nylon separation, we only need one of each. And this is how a flat machine can do a sleeve or a sock. Now let me open the gap and you can see all those nylon stitches on the back only and the front only. So that's why we call it tubular knitting. And we will now activate all the cams and make swatch number 1, which is, of course, got to select the right yarn. We're using 2 ends, one from either side, of 224 acrylic. And now this is our first course. We're knitting 30 needles wide. All the swatches that were sent to you were 30 needles wide. So this is to compare in case you weigh them. You can see how the different settings affected their overall weight. That's 1. That's 2. So each traverse adds another course to the fabric. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20. So now sample 1 is complete. And we continue by putting in the separating thread, the nylon. Select it, miss the back, we'll knit the front going left, knit the back and miss the front going right. So we do that tubular separation. Front only, back only. It makes a little noise because the cams are created in such a way that you can leave the setting, and we'll show you when we do the cams upside down and demonstrate. So now swatch 2. Let's say we're going to do a tighter version, which means we're going to knit at 13 all around, 2 points tighter. If you go more than 2 points, you're getting extreme, and you can go too tight and it stops knitting. So I'm going to 13 on all 4 corners. We have the ability, if needed, to have different settings in different directions on the front versus back and so on. So that's another versatility feature that's built into this machine for special applications. So now I have 13 on all 4 corners, and select my yarn, and much tighter little stitches now, because the loop, the stitch cam, doesn't pull as far, therefore the stitches are much smaller. You must always end up where the other yarn is. If you stop on the wrong side and push the button, it's not going to jump there for you. So before you make any changes, make sure that the other yarn is there. So now I'm going to put the nylon. Now nylon doesn't like to be knit too tight. It doesn't come out too easy. And we're going to do a loose swatch. So we're going to go to 17 now, which is 2 stitches looser, bigger than previously. So we're going to 17 all around. And you will, when you get a chance to actually knit yourself, you will find that when you make big stitches, you need more energy to push the carriage across, because much more yarn is being consumed with each course. So now nylon is set. Knit the front, miss the back, going left. Knit the back, miss the front, coming right, to do the tubular. So this separation will be at 17. There it goes. It'll come out nice and easy when we separate the pieces later. Back to the body yarn at 17 all around. And now I have to put more body behind it because it takes more energy to push. 14, 16, 20, 30. So we now have the basic 15 setting, a tight 13 setting, and a loose 17 setting, all done with two ends of 224. The other variables are with added yarn and less yarn. But first things first, separating thread in between. So I'm going to do the separation in nylon, knit the front going left, knit the back coming right. So how do we go from two ends to one end? We simply break off one end and let it sit for further use. So I broke off one of the ends, and I don't want to knit this, I just want to knit with one end, so I have to get rid of the extra yarn. So, using a needle, hook of a needle, I pull out the extra and put it away. Now it's gone. So from here on, it's going to be only one end. And we want to do this at 15 again. So we will compare swatch number 4 to swatch number 1. They were both done at 15, except this fourth swatch will be done with only one end instead of two. And it will be a much looser piece of fabric. So we're back to 15 on all four corners. All right, yarn, body yarn, and here we go. Oh, is this easy? You notice when you're working with thick yarns, I was knitting slowly because you're putting a lot of stress on the stitch cam, and if you try to force it and go too fast, you overwhelm the spring that controls the stitch cam. So with one end, it's much less tension on the stitch cams, and I'm able to simply go back and forth with one arm. That's my 30. All right, so like always, separating thread in between, take away the extra cams, knit the front only going left, the back only going right with our nylon. Okie dokie. Now, this is the hardest. We're going to add another yarn to more than basic. The basic was 2 ends, now we want 3 ends. I'm actually going to go behind there and thread a little bit. So we're going to take the third end, and the yarn has to come basically straight up before you change directions, so the yarn can unwind nice and easy. So we're going straight up past this guy. We're going to tie it on over here. We're going to make an ugly knot, nothing beautiful. We're not going to knit the knot. If we want to knit the knot, we make sure it's a square knot or even a weaver's knot, which is the smallest knot you can make. It has to pass through the hook of the needle in order not to cause a damage. All right, so here is my 2 ends coming. And I want to incorporate it here with the feeder that has one end threaded. So I will come from the left. You don't go circuitously or around corners. You always go with a straight flow whenever possible. The guides are there to make sure there's no interference. And now I'm going to make another nasty knot. Like I said, we're not going to knit the knot. This is a twirly knot. You twirl it around with your finger. We used to call them cat's heads. So we can't knit that, so we take that needle, reach through from underneath, where is it? There it is. And then this is the most important guide on the feeder because that brings the yarn directly into the hook of the needle. And as I'm watching, I notice something else. The fabric is just about to hit the floor. And once the fabric hits the floor, the weights hit the floor, there will be no more pull down force on the fabric, and it will stop knitting properly. Okay, so with that said, I will rehang the weights a little higher up. Come back. Now we can knit again until that's near the floor. So we have three ends coming through to the nylon is done. We can always look and see what we did last. We did the nylon separation, so now at 15, three ends. And this is a little bit harder, and we cannot rush it because that extra yarn, if you rush it, will overcome the stitch caps. Twenty-six, 8, 30. As I mentioned before, we made them all 30 courses. So if you weigh them, you can get a comparison of how the changes affect the weight of the fabric. All right. How do we take the fabric off? When you knit without yarn, the fabric is released. So what happens, the needles come up, but since there's no yarn to change into a loop, to reform into a stitch, the needles will come up and on their way down will release the fabric. So in order to not make a noise and let the weights drop, I'm going to hold on to the fabric. Now the needles are coming up and releasing one after the other. The needle bed is clear, and now I have fabric. I usually never tie it around. This is one reason why. Okay, now we can unhook the weights. Okay, for safety, these weights have ridges and grooves. So your ridge and your groove should match and be safe and not fall and hit you on the foot or make your toe black. So we started with 5 different swatches. First, we got the machine going. Then we have a nylon. Here's the nylon. Let me demonstrate a separation. As you saw, we knitted one bed, then the other. If we simply clip the far end and pull out one end, we now have dropped all the stitches on one side. And then if we pull the other end, you see it comes right apart. And that's why we call it separation thread. So this is scrap, getting the machine going and all. This is your controlled swatch, done at 15. Then we went to 13, and it's much tighter. See the difference? And you will have the swatch in your swatch kit to compare and feel the difference. And then we went to 17, and look at how stretchy this is and loose. Then we went to single end at, so this was 13, 17. We went back to 15. We did single end at 15, and it's kind of sheer and distorted. And then we went and did 15 with 3 ends, and this is the thickest and densest of them all. All right, you may wonder, how do we start up a machine? A machine is, in most cases, they use a comb which fits the needle size, the cut of the machine. But since we have many different machines here, it's hard to maintain proper combs for every machine. So we came up with this other technique called the pickup fabric. We knit a stretchy fabric on a different machine that will accommodate many different needle sizes. And we open the gap. The machine has an ability to open the space between needles, so we can bring the fabric from below. Center it above the machine, the needles that are about to be engaged. So I have 30 needles here, so I'm hanging it about 1.5 to 1 inch above the needle bed. I start bringing some needles, some hooks into the fabric from one side. Then I go to the other side and work my way back. And I actually feel the needles coming through the fabric. If you push the needles too high and go past the latch, it could be problematic. So we just bring them up high enough to get the hooks in. So now all my needles have their hooks in the fabric. At this point, we give a little tension on the fabric and bring those needles flush with the needle bed, because we cannot knit into that fabric, and that fabric has to be now folded out of the way. We take the back of a needle, which is smooth, and simply fold that fabric out of the way. And at this point, as it was mentioned, we need pull-down force. We can now hang the hooks into the fabric. So that will serve as the pull-down force. We try to hang it balanced so it'll pull evenly across both sides of the fabric. And now we have pull-down fabric. We close the bed, and now we have to come to where the yarn is.